movement his compassion toward the sacred Dharma to rid us of all misconceived views. So today, the main disciples for this teaching, we may call them, have come from Taiwan. The students among people who belong to the Bliss and Wisdom organization founded by Venerable Tenzin Chamchen, as well as we have people who have come from other places and who permanently live here, men and women, as well as monastics. And then there are people from Vietnam, Korea, and Japan and so forth, who are traditionally also Buddhist. And then we have also people from countries which traditionally didn't used to be Buddhist countries. So many of them, you have come here. So first of all, I would like to greet you all. So usually, during this kind of teaching, before teaching about Buddhism, I give some introduction to Buddhism. Many of us call ourselves Buddhists, but we don't really take interest in what Buddhism is about and follow the teaching of the Buddha more or less in a blind faith. So we need to check the teaching, and then having gained a conviction in the teaching, we should be able to develop a faith based on reason. Of course, during the actual teaching, will come across a lot of Buddhist points of consideration. So here, to do the introduction, all religions, including Buddhism, what is the relevance of all these religious traditions, whether they are needed in today's world or not. So all sentient beings, including the smallest insects, like ants and so forth, have this instinctive feeling of wishing to have happiness and avoid suffering. So we don't have to reason this out. So this innumerable number of sentient beings want happiness and do not want suffering. And these two, pain and pleasure, come from their causes and conditions. So to check into what are the causes and conditions of pain and pleasure cannot be done by other animals. We human beings can do that because we have this mind, this intelligence. So of course I also do pray for all sentient beings, but if we wish to be practical about this prayer, if we could help, even though it may be small, the human beings on this earth that would be being practical about our prayer. Otherwise, for the rest of the sentient beings in other galaxies and so forth, and we can, of course, include them in our prayers for happiness. So because of this marvelous brain that we have as human beings, we need to see how to reduce suffering and increase our happiness, and this is something worthwhile to do. I always tell people this, that my first commitment is to that we are all, each and every one of us, is a part of the 7 billion people. So we are social animals. We live in communities through which we survive. So we have parents, our relatives, friends, and then friends of our friends, and so forth. So we are related to all of them. So even as an individual, however resolute and dedicated you may be in terms of practicing a warm heart, if we could help one person from beginning with 1 and then going on to 10, 100, 1,000, and so forth, we could do something. So as a human being on this earth, one of the 7 billion individuals, although we may have, as human beings, different languages, what we need to do is to bring about happiness for ourselves and others. So in the world today, we have a great advancement in material terms. So I usually think that over before a few thousands of years, the monasteries were taking responsibility of teaching people. In the West, for example, Christian monasteries and nunneries became centers of learning, and also other religious traditions like Judaism and so forth were practicing like that. So the monastic institutions became the learning centers. And then in Europe particularly, when science began to flourish, and then technology, the monastic institutions, of course in science, mathematics also became very important. And so as education developed further, the monastic institutions were not sufficient to give education to the people, and therefore the educational institutions separated from the monasteries. So these new institutions which came up mainly took responsibility and paid attention to teaching modern subjects like mathematics and others, geography, the sciences. And with regard to the inner world, peace of mind and morality, these new educational institutions didn't take responsibility of these, and the monastic institutions were doing that. Please don't shout. And then later, as the material development became more advanced through science and technology, the monastic institutions became less relevant in society. And therefore, the whole society became focused on material development alone. The education was more or less oriented towards material development. And as a result of that, the whole society became more materialistic oriented, and people became the materialistic life and materialistic culture came into existence. So first, let us have tea.
文殊师利勇士与自在智慧妙平充满至甘露广大教细海美庄至圣手持白莲我颂。
So that was the no Tibetan tea. What happened? What happened?
It's the wrong sentence, David. You read the wrong sentence.
Really? The verse which His Holiness recited in the beginning is the praise to Panchaparamita, homage to the perfection of wisdom, the mother of all Buddhas of the three times, past, present, future, which is beyond words, inconceivable, inexpressible, unproduced, and unobstructed, in the nature of space, the object domain of self-aware wisdom. And then the Heart Sutra mantra, Tatyatha Gate Gate Paragate Parasangate Bodhisvaha, was recited. So we usually have a saying that when someone is hungry, you feel asleep, and if you are too full, you also fall asleep. And so His Holiness is saying, take the bread and tea to do away with your hunger, so that you don't fall asleep. Gode matin şaş. Becer komes işte. So I will keep talking now, and while you keep taking your tea. So these societies where there is materialistic development alone. People think that mere sensorial pleasure can give them happiness. So, of course, there is pleasure, physical pleasure, sensorial, and sensorial gratification, where you have no pain, which even the animals are able to obtain, and they are not able to work with their mind as such for pain, pleasure. And therefore, because of materialistic culture, people think that the more the material developments, the more they'll have happiness. And therefore, they seek pleasure, which have to only to do with the sensorial experiences, seeing some beautiful sights, hearing a beautiful music, or good taste and touch, and also including the sex. And so these have to do with sensorial pleasure. Speaker 当着去。The time快没吃啥，进来就不是。So even if you may have some sensorial stimulus, like entertainments and so forth, if you are internally unhappy, lots of worries and so forth, there is no pleasure in listening to the music and looking at the shows and so forth, however beautiful they may be. But there is this mental consciousness which does not have anything to do with the lebar. And so the sensorial experiences also are related to that of the brain. And therefore, when the scientists explain and describe about the mental processes, they more or less describe it on the basis of brain, which are more or less related with the sensorial consciousness and not the mental one. So when they explain about consciousness, although, of course, mental consciousness also has some correlates in the brain, but mainly the brain functions have to do with the sensorial experiences. And we can see that there are mental processes which don't have much to do with the brain processes as such, as the mind becomes more and more subtle. So this time I have visited Italy, several places, and I had discussions with scientists there. So over 30 years I have had discussions with scientists, and when the psychologists explain our experience, they more or less relate the sensorial experiences. And so for the most part of 20th century and before that, people have more or less focused on the sensorial experiences. But towards the end of the 20th century, scientists have begun to take some interest in the mental processes. And then there is also this people taking interest in meditation, which have to do with our mind, the mental consciousness. So because of lack of attention to the mental consciousness, although there has been so much advancement in material terms, there's still so much suffering in people, in human beings. Of course, there is also natural disasters which bring about misery, but many of the problems that we face today in the world are our own creation. We go even to the length of killing human beings by human beings. And we had the First World War, the Second World War, then was the Korean War, Vietnam War, and then there had been civil wars in China and many other countries where people have killed other people. So just a few days ago, 2-3 days ago, I think it was in, he's talking about Las Vegas. So there have been, it was yesterday, over 50 people were killed in that, firing of a gun by somebody, and then over 200 or 400 people are injured. And then, because of difference of religions, there is also killing human beings by human beings in the name of religion. And then, in many cases, due to lack of human compassion, there is war, battles, and then also because of lack of sanitation, medication, hygiene, and so forth. And all people, even particularly children, are dying of starvation. So we can see pictures of these starving children and other people. So because these people with money pay attention to indulging in practices that are fueled by hate and attachment and so forth, and without concern for the poor people, these are happening. So we are lacking in giving education and nourishment and so forth to these poor people. People are selling weapons, and the purpose of weapons is to kill others. So we are all same human beings suffering, and those who cause suffering are also human beings. So if we look at the situation, of course, these problems were not caused merely by through our sensorial experience, but we use our mind, which is overcome with our attachment, lust, and also that is attached to our near and dear ones, and then anger, which is aversion towards those whom we consider as our enemies and adversaries. And because of this love-hate attitude, we kill, bully, rob others. And so because of this division between us and they, and because of the attachment to those on our side and aversion towards those adversaries, we cause these problems. So of course we have attachment and anger. So it's as if these have some kind of a responsibility for our survival as well. We see that. But when you have attachment and anger, you are more or less narrow-minded, short-sighted, and therefore problems are caused. So all of us, not only human beings, but even animals who live in a society or a community, we live by the community as social animals, and therefore there's need for love and compassion. So just the moment we are born, we are nurtured by love because of our mother taking care of us right at birth and breastfeeding us. And so this is something that's biologically, naturally in us. So some scientists even say that the basic human nature is compassionate. So they're not talking from a religious point of view, but that the basic human nature is compassionate is explained in such a way that when the child is in the mother's womb and the mother is full of love and care, it really helps the child, the embryo. And right after birth, if the mother abandons the child out of hate or something, then of course the child will die. So the 7 billion people on this earth, all of us were born from our mothers, and our mother nurtured us with her milk. So biologically speaking also, this is the case with us. Of course, when somebody shows kindness and compassion to you, you are happy. Whereas if that expression is not there in somebody, then you don't also feel happy. So during a conference with scientists, I was also there. They showed an animation where 2 children were shown playing. One child is pushing a ball uphill and has difficulty, and another child comes and helps the first child to push the ball uphill. And that cartoon or the animation was shown to an infant who was about 6 months pre-verbal. So when the infant was shown this animation, it smiles. Of course, this infant is pre-verbal. So when 2 children were helping each other, this infant was happy and smiles. Whereas in another animation, as the first child, one child was pushing the ball up, and another child comes and pushes it down. Instead of helping, it was obstructing the first child. So when this cartoon was shown to the 6-month-old infant, the child has unhappy expression. So, therefore, the scientists concluded that from these kind of experiments that the basic human nature is compassionate. So when you show love and compassion, the infant actually smiles and laughs, whereas in the other one, the infant was unhappy. And so the scientist explained that the basic human nature is compassionate. So therefore, if we give thought to this, many of the problems in the world today are because of our anger and because of this division that we make amongst ourselves. So if we have love and compassion, just as you love others showing compassion to you, likewise, you should show to others. Of course, we have this biological level of love and compassion, which is more or less biased, partial. It only covers the parents and our near and dear ones. You'll say that, oh, this person is my friend or someone who is helpful to me, and then accordingly you love them. So that is more or less oriented towards their attitude. Whereas if someone who actually causes harm to you or who dislikes you, you consider them your adversary. So of course, right at our birth, we do not have such thing as friends and enemies, or enemies and friends as such. But because of people's attitude, we make this division between those who are on our side and those who are not on our side. So if we think more broadly, as human beings, we are social animals. So today, this social animal, the human being, has become like one global community because of the climatic conditions and other environmental problems and so forth. And so these natural disasters that are happening actually shows us or teaches us that we are one human family. So we need to take this lesson, actually. So in each continent, of course, if your neighboring country is more peaceful, you'll also benefit. Whereas if it's disturbed, you also will be disturbed. So we should be able to take that the whole world is highly interconnected today between nations, between continents. So in the past, of course, each community, even small communities, lived independently, rather self-sufficient with their needs. But today, that's not the case. The whole world is interconnected. And this is actually taught to us also by the climatic condition. And therefore, those who are actually good to you, not only to them, but we should extend our love towards all human beings. So this could be done through education. So from religious point of view, or we talk about us and them, but we need to expand that attitude so that it covers the whole humanity, thinking that we are all human beings. So if we could have and promote this oneness of humanity, this is possible and it should be promoted. So we as Buddhists pray for the benefit of all sentient beings when we say, may all sentient beings have happiness in its causes, and may all sentient beings be free from suffering in its causes. So if we really mean by what we pray for, of course, we do pray for all sentient beings in the whole of the universe, in the many different galaxies and so forth, where there are billions and billions of world systems and so forth. Of course, if we mean by what we pray, then we should do something for the human beings on this earth to reduce and decrease the suffering caused by human beings. And therefore, whether they are believers or not, because the basic human nature is compassionate, as scientists also say that if you have compassion, then you have peace of mind, and that also helps your physical health as well to have longevity. If you are full of anxiety, suspicion, anger, and so forth, jealousy, and so forth, then the immune system within ourselves also depletes. So that's what the scientists are saying. So if we also think with our common sense, of course we cannot live alone without any neighbors. So we have to have neighbors. But if we have neighbors who always fight with us, would you be happy? I mean, as soon as you see such a neighbor, you would actually pretend not to have seen them. And you cast a furtive glance at them. So whether, on the other hand, if you have friendly and loving neighbors, even though they may be poor, you will be happy to see them smile at each other and so forth, and eat together. So that in this way you'll be happy. If you remain angry with each other, you'll not be happy at all. So as we have this saying, look at your own body, take that as an example, and don't harm others. So from our own experience, we know that if people show love to us, we like that. And similarly, if we could express our love and kindness towards others, that would be beneficial to maybe one person. From there, it may increase to 10, and then exponentially to 100 and 1,000 and so forth. So whether you're a believer or not, we all want happiness, not suffering. Of course, when you are fully disturbed, when you have a completely disturbed mind, you'll be unhappy. But happiness and joyfulness is what we want. And therefore, we need to be compassionate and loving to one another. And therefore, we need to promote this through education. We don't need to talk about God, the Creator, or anything about, we don't need to touch religion as such, but using our common sense and common experience, as I said before. We are all, we were born from our mothers. So through these, we can educate people for happiness. So we have been doing this kind of research for the last 15 years or so. So we need to know for that, we need to know about the psychology, the map of emotions. So when we talk about consciousness or mind, it's not enough just to focus on the sensorial experiences, but we also need to focus on the mind, the mental consciousness. And therefore, we need to know the workings of our mind. So today, these days, I talk about the hygiene. In order to have hygiene of our body, we need to focus on the hygiene of our mind. So we need an education which covers this topic, and that could be taught from the kindergarten level up to university. So from amongst the 7 billion people, we are about 1 billion people. I saw a report somewhere that 1 billion is are non-believers, and then the 6 billion or so are believers. But most of these people who call themselves believers of this or that religion follow their religions more or less like a habit, a custom sort of thing, but without knowing anything about their own religion. But if they pay attention to what their religions teach, all religions teach love, compassion, tolerance, forgiveness, contentment, and self-discipline. If the followers of the religions sincerely follow their religion, there's no way they could fight with one another. So, of course, historically, we have records of fightings among people in the name of religion, and this also happens today. So, regardless of whether you're a believer or not, if we could educate people so that they could change their outlook on life better. So because today the education is more or less materialistically oriented, I mean, there's not much education on the how we should cultivate kindness, love, and so forth. So, of course, we need to be compassionate towards even animals, down to the smallest insects. So I think it's possible to educate people on love and compassion. It's possible. What's going on? He's on the thing with the mic. So, of course, the result cannot be expected immediately, but we need to have some strategic kind of a plan. So we're talking about secular ethics, which is not touching any religion, but teaching people about morality, so that we could actually teach them about the mental hygiene, not only talking about physical ones. So if we could start this kind of project now, then in about 15 to 20 years or 30 years, we could see some change in the generation who are brought up in this kind of education. So our prayers for all sentient beings should not be just lip service. And if we wish to be practical, of course, of our prayer, then we should do something for humanity. For the animals, of course, we may make our prayers. Other than that, there's nothing much we could do. And therefore, as I usually say, my first commitment is to promote compassion amongst humanity through education. If we could do that, then the 21st century could be made into a century of peace. so that people have this sense of oneness of humanity and take responsibility to solve problems of other human beings. So, to all of you who are gathered here, my students, Dharma brothers and sisters, you are my friends. So think along these lines as a human being, the oneness of humanity. You should think that, of course, I have to live with my friends and neighbors. But if I live always fighting, I have a friend, an Australian, during our public talk, I met this person who told me that a neighbor scratched his his brand new car, and he became very angry at the neighbor. And even though he saw the neighbor coming from some place, he would pretend as if he had not seen him. And then he lived like that for some time, and one day he thought that just living like this with anger at my neighbor does not help me. And therefore, he went to his neighbor and told him that I've been angry with you because of this incident, and it doesn't help me at all, so I'm sorry. So he apologized, and therefore he became very relaxed after that. So you become angry at people whom you know, not at those whom you do not know at all. So Kadamba masters used to say that human beings can complain about other human beings and talk about other human beings. We cannot talk with animals and insects and so forth. So we need to deal with human beings in our life. So we need also to, for our survival also, we need to depend on other human beings. So if you think more broadly from a wider perspective, you could resolve differences by talking to people. So, and then, secondly, as a Buddhist practitioner, and having been in exile for over 58 years now in India, whatever the past may be, maybe I could say this, that today all the major religious traditions of the world live in India. So in India, the homegrown religions such as religious traditions like Sankhya, and from which the others were derived. And then there is also Jainism and Buddhism and so forth. And then later, religious traditions from outside India emigrated here, such as Christianity, Zoroastrianism, Judaism, Islam. So Zoroastrianism came from the ancient Persia. So all these major religious traditions of the world are today living in India. There may be some differences due to the politicians politicizing religion. So, amongst the over 1 billion people in this country, if this the religions live in harmony, all these religious traditions. So, a country which is which has the most one of the biggest population in the world if in such a country it's possible for the religious traditions to live in harmony with each other, one another, then it's possible also in other countries as well. So all the religions have the same message. Messages of love, tolerance, and so forth. And therefore, if you look at the Christian practitioners, they really help the poor and destitute. Those of the Christian nuns like Mother Teresa and so forth help the poor people. And they also give education and health care to poor people. There are many of them. And then there are amongst the Muslims also people helping others and being kind and warm-hearted. So all these religious traditions have this same positive and good messages. Today, people have a strange idea when we mention Islam. But in reality, if someone is a Muslim, a practitioner of Islam, they should if they revere, worship Allah, then they should actually extend their love towards all creature of Allah. Of course, philosophical differences may be there amongst the religious traditions, but if they really practice love and compassion that are taught in their religions, we're not talking about worshipping spirits, but these major messages of love, compassion, and so forth. If the followers practice them sincerely, they should, if they really mean by what they talk, they should really practice love and compassion. It doesn't help if they just remain the same person without making any transformation. So in Islam, they say that all human beings are created by Allah, and Christianity also says all human beings are created by God. And therefore, there's need for love and compassion towards each other. When they talk about or describe that of a quality of God or Allah, they say that God is infinite love, and therefore the creatures are like the God's children, and therefore we need really to practice love and compassion to one another. And then regarding the Sankhya school of philosophy in India, there was this non-theistic Sankhya school, and also which doesn't believe in a creator God as such. And then Jainism and Buddhism also do not believe in a creator God. But we talk about the law of causality. The Buddha has said, cultivating, not committing any evil, cultivating a wealth of virtue, and thoroughly taming one's mind. This is the teaching of the Buddha. So taming the mind means you're not giving in to love, this attachment, anger, and so forth. Because if you harm others through these negative emotions, I mean, those actions, in other words, which give unhappiness, suffering to others, those are negative actions, and those actions which cause happiness in oneself and others, those are the positive ones. So in other words, those actions which help and benefit. So in other words, those thoughts and actions which benefit others, they are positive actions, and those thoughts and actions which bring about suffering to others, they are negative actions. So if you actually are compelled by love and compassion, you will not harm others. If you actually let yourself be overcome with anger, then controlled by anger, then you will harm others. So whether you are a believer in theistic religions or non-theistic religions, love or compassion is considered as the basis of our happiness. So in order to be able to do a practice of love and compassion well, there is also the teaching of tolerance, forgiveness, contentment, and so forth. So, of course, philosophically speaking, there may be differences amongst the religions. Some believe in a creator God, others don't believe in a creator God. But to some, it's more powerful, and when they believe in a creator God. To others, that's not the case. In the case of Chinese people, you usually say Amitabha, call homage to Amitabha, and there is almost a sense that the Amitabha Buddha is like a creator. That's not the case. So amongst Tibetans also, there is this kind of a belief that everything will come from the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. So, of course, to think like that may be good. We say that the three jewels are full of love, wisdom, and power. Regarding the God, the Creator, who is full of love, wisdom, and power, and if you look at the creation, we see in the world there's so much suffering and fighting amongst people. So one of my friends told me that why are there so many people who are bad? Everyone is created by God. And then I didn't have real answer, but I thought and then said that God also, you believe that God also created heaven and hell. And so there must be people to go to hell. Otherwise there's no purpose in the creation of hell, I told him. So if God is infinite love, wisdom, and power, and if we still have to say that there is this kind of problem, it's slightly intriguing, isn't it? And when I was in Italy recently, we had a religious interfaith meeting where different speakers talked about their own religions, such as Judaism, Christianity, and then there was a speaker from Islam. So all of them, of course, talk about everything coming from God. And of course, all these religions are beneficial to human beings. But in other words, what I'm saying is that all religions have the same message of love, and therefore it is possible to promote harmony amongst the religious traditions. So there may be about 1 billion Christians, and also Muslims, 1 billion. And maybe 1 billion Buddhists today in the different, if we take all the followers of Buddhism in the different Buddhist countries like Thailand, Burma, Sri Lanka, Cambodia, and so forth. And also there are 400 million Buddhists in China today. So maybe there are 1 billion Buddhists in the world today. So all of us are human beings, same human beings, the 7 billion. So if we could live helping one another, that would be good, wouldn't it? And practice the good messages in our own religions so that we make transformation within ourselves by decreasing those of attachment and anger. So this is what we need to do here, in fact. So I work towards the harmony amongst all the religious traditions in the world. I know I have a friend, a Christian friend, during a public talk in Australia. When he introduced me, he said the Dalai Lama is a good Christian. And then during my turn, I said, I consider you a good Buddhist. So showing love and serving people, and especially the poor and needy ones, we have the same message, of course. So this Christian brother is actually helping the people in the streets, people without homes, and he gathers them and organizes soup kitchen and so forth. So this is one of my commitments, promoting religious harmony. And I attend interfaith meetings. So my Dharma brothers and sisters, spiritual brothers and sisters, wherever you are living, you should also do your best to promote harmony amongst the religious traditions of the world. Is it 10 o'clock now? Perhaps we could have a 15-minute break here. So if you need to go to the restroom, please go. So those who need to go to the loo, please go, and those who otherwise will have If you don't need to go, then we'll do a question and answers session here.
第一个问题是说，请问尊者，常依自主的我，以及独立实体的我，与自信的我，是这三者是有什么差别？
但要我做嘛？
但是有案件给大家是然后呢，就给大家送一套。
The question is, what's the difference between the permanent singular and unitary self, and then the gross independent self, and like that, sort of these different things. This Holiness, the answer will come later on during the teaching. The question is about like Devu Yongdashi, the four perfected state, resultant state. And I didn't get the full answer question. Now the answer is in the Buddhism there's Vajrayana and Sutrayana, and in Vajrayana the most of final answers come in the Anuttara Yoga Tantra, and especially in the explanations on the clay light wisdom. And so the special qualities of Tantra are it comes out from this presentation on the clay light, but it is not an easy thing. One has to have considerable amount of understanding on emptiness. And His Holiness said, generally, many of the, if I dare say a little bit, many lamas who give initiations and empowerments like that, and that's kind of like very popular, but not much explanation on the introduction on Buddhism, the fundamentals of Buddhism. And then even if they are asked to do so, they don't. They themselves have some short supply of knowledge on that. So that's not that's a drawback, I think. Now, in the case of Westerners, when somebody explains on Buddhism, they pay great attention, even take notes. Whereas Asians, many of our tendencies during the explanation on the presentation of Buddhism, they sort of doze off, go to take nap, and then during initiation they pay a lot of attention. Whereas, so this is wrong, and the real Buddhism, the essence of Buddhism is actually in the explanations, the presentations. So, for example, there are the three kinds of wisdom. Wisdom obtained through learning, through contemplation, and through meditation. So wisdom that arises out of meditation has to come through contemplation. And so through contemplation and analysis, which also includes analysis, one has to do thorough research, investigation into this on the topic that one is one is practicing, and should gain full knowledge, full conviction. And if you have, once you gain such a complete ascertainment, and then if you meditate, then the meditation would have more power and more conviction also. So my point is, generally many people lack good understanding on general knowledge of Buddhism, and then immediately start off practicing meditation. So then there's not much effect as a result of that. In the Chinese, next question is, in the Chinese tradition, there's a lot of emphasis on the practice of getting reborn in the Pure Land, like the Pure Land of Amitabha, like that. What is His Holiness's opinion on that? That is, His Holiness says, that is very good. But in order to get born in the Pure Land, one should engage in the proper causes and conditions that will enable a disciple to get born in these realms. Just praying and visualizing the Pure Land alone and reciting the Pure Land mantras is not enough. Next question is about Vajrayana. In the Vajrayana, you talk about the state of union at the end, which is the state of Buddhahood, I have an American friend, like he says that like even the butterflies and insects, they do mating in order to. And he was saying, if in Tantra also they say the male and female yoga practitioners practice the union in order to draw all the gross veins into the central channel. Then what about those insects? And they also mate, and do they do that for that same purpose? So he was kind of like witty and smart. But this is slightly different here. Generally, union means the emptiness. Essential meaning is the union of the subjective emptiness and through experience and repeated meditation, the mind and the object, which is emptiness, should merge into one, so become indivisible. So that is called the union of wisdom and emptiness. So in the according to the new tantric system, the union here refers to the union of the illusory body and the clear light wisdom. And in Tantra, there is explanation on the need for consort, need for the consort at certain stage. The main essence behind that is that in order to subdue the gross winds and energies through dissolution of the then these, in order to dissolve them into the central channel, then the consort is taking a consort is important. But this is not about just general union, general sort of ordinary union that normal humans engage in. It's not. It's totally different. And such a practice of union in Tantra is practiced at a certain stage when a practitioner has reached a sort of an authentic level of practice of tantric techniques. The next question is about guru devotion and emptiness, like that. What is the different relation between these practices? In highest yoga tantra, generally speaking, like Anuttara or Lama actually means something like the highest, the upper, or the superior. So Lama, the word Lama means somebody who shows you the path, your teacher who leads you onto this path to higher realization and path to liberation and enlightenment. Whereas emptiness means the ultimate reality of phenomena, which if one can realize, but this will actually come later on, we are bound in samsara due to the self-grasping ignorance. However, through realization of the emptiness, which is the root of samsara, then one would be able to attain liberation. If not, one will remain bound in cycle existence. Next question is the sameness of the human humanity. His Holiness said about that. His Holiness emphasized on that. Is that related to how to combine that practice with our practice of guru devotion, like that? And answer is, His Holiness says regarding this first point that all human beings are similar in terms of being humans. For example, if in the case of small children, if one child is playing, other child sees that, then they don't care whether that child is different from himself, oneself or another. They immediately go and join the game. So if on the other hand, now also, if we are, for example, living alone in a sort of an isolated place, and certainly a human being is coming by, if you see it like that, then you will immediately feel very happy because you see a same fellow human being coming and would feel delighted and go towards that person to have a chat. So however, now ordinarily, as our society becomes more sophisticated, like due to different sort of designations such as like religious, political, caste, creed, like that. These sort of create fabricated divisions within our minds and within our society. So that is why I emphasize on the sameness of human family. The next question is, generally we try to practice like ethical discipline like that, and these sort of the morality like that. In dream, however, we cannot. We give rise to these. We dream of the arisal of the three poisons like that. How to control that? Now this is in tantric practice. There are prescribed practices for dream, awakened state, sleep state, like that. Generally, ordinarily speaking, in dream, sometimes we dream of something that we have never seen, like a place or a person like that. Usually we just dream of something that we are all familiar with, somebody we already know. But dreams, what appears in your dream is very much related to what you are used to during the daytime when you're awake. For example, during awakened state, if you think I am a bhikshu, then in dream also you think I am a bhikshu. Now the only difference is that in sleep, in dream state, your the ordinary memory is not there, and
So my third commitment is, as a Tibetan, in my childhood, because we were following feudalism, there was lots of shortcomings and drawbacks in the governance system of government. And so after coming into exile, and before that, of course, after coming into exile, I democratized the system of government. But before that, in 1951-52, after I was installed on the throne, given dual responsibility, I started the reform committee, but then it was not successful. But after coming into exile, then in the 60s, we started the democratization of our society. And then in 2001, we finally had an elected political leadership, and therefore I remained semi-retired after that for 10 years. And then since 2011, I devolved all my political authority to the elected political leadership. So in the 8th century, and the Tibetan Emperor Tsongkhapa invited the top Nalanda master Chandrakirti to Tibet, and he helped in establishing the monastic ordination, monastic system in Tibet, and then also in this Nalanda tradition, we have a very clear presentation and explanation of philosophical systems of India. Of course, the text that we are going to go through is part of that. And then in Bhava Viveka's Madhyamaka Sridaya, heart of the essence of the middle way, and his commentary to that, Tarkachavala, a blaze of reasoning. These actually give in detail all the philosophical systems that were extant in India. And then regarding the epistemology and logic, Chandrakirti himself wrote, of course, Tattva Samgraha, and Kamalashila wrote Tattva Samgraha Panjika, and later Master Sakya Pandita of Tibet wrote the Treasury of Logic or Epistemology. And Chabachuja Singh also and other masters also wrote texts on logic and epistemology. And so study of logic is prevalent in Tibetan tradition of Buddhism, which is not so the case in other Buddhist countries like China and so forth. So in this tradition that we follow, the Nalanda tradition, we memorize the students of classic texts memorize the text, and then listen to the explanation, word per word explanation and word by word explanation, and then also go through rigorous debate using logic and reasoning. And therefore, this kind of rigorous study of Buddhist philosophy, I mean, not only Buddhism, but Indo-Tibetan philosophical tradition is extant only in the Tibetan tradition. And regarding epistemology and logic, it is something that we can use to contribute to the educational projects in the world. And this ancient Indian knowledge so in our monastic institutions, we have monks also who study in our monastic institutions of learning, where the monks and nuns study the logic, text on logic. And then today we also have included the study of science. So we're not talking about using Buddhist religion as such to serve the world, but we talk about using this kind of philosophical tradition that we have, taking at these subjects as academic subjects to contribute to the world. So you need also to take interest in and pay attention to this. As my friends as a Tibetan. So this is one of my commitments to raise awareness of the Tibetan cultural tradition and also the Tibetan environment and ecology. So of course, the late Venerable Tenzin Chamjin's organization and your monasteries and nunnery, of course you are doing a lot of studies of Buddhist philosophy through debates, so you should work hard on this. So that's all. Then now we'll go through the text. Madhyamaka Avatara. So from amongst the translation of the exegetical treatises, the important Madhyamaka texts are such as Aryadeva's 400 verses, and then the explanation of the meaning of Mula Madhyamaka Karika, which is Madhyamaka Avatara, written by Chandrakirti, is a text. These are studied by all the Tibetan Buddhist traditions, like Nyingma, Gyaluk, Kagyu, and so forth. And then with regard to this text, Madhyamaka Avatara, I received the explanation, commentary, or transmission from Ling Rinpoche of this text, and he received it from Jonel Lama Rinpoche. And then, with regard to the auto-commentary of Madhyamaka Avatara by Chandrakirti, which is quite rare, I received it from the Sakya abbot Gunga Wangchuk. I received the explanatory transmission from him. He was someone who actually was imprisoned for many years in Tibet. So later he came to India, and so I received this transmission, explanatory transmission from him. So I also thought that I would do the reading transmission of Jerem Butches, Tsongkhapa's Praise to the Buddha for Teaching Dependent Origination, because I find it's relevant to the organization of the late Tenzin Chamjin. So I've memorized this in my childhood. I was quite bright. I could memorize it within about an hour one morning. So you should also compete with me to be able to, so that you could also memorize within that time period. So this text is full of blessing because it was written by Tsongkhapa after having fully found conviction in the teaching of the Buddha, of dependent origination and emptiness, and gaining faith in the Buddha based on reason. Then he extemporaneously kind of wrote this, or composed this text. So I use some verses from this text and recite them on a daily basis. I don't know if I'm being too exaggerate, if it's too much of an exaggeration or not, but I usually call Jerem Butche the second Nagarjuna. So this is not about attachment to Gelug's tradition as such. If you really study the writings of Tsongkhapa, especially the Ocean of Reasoning, which is a commentary to Mula Madhyamaka Karika, and also the Elucidation of Thought, which is a commentary to Madhyamaka Avatara. And you can really find what kind of person, what kind of scholarship he had. And then also the essence of true eloquence. If you read these writings, you'll really find them to be excellent. I know one Sanskrit scholar from Varanasi, Ramashankar Tripathi, and he worked in translating into Hindi the essence of true eloquence, which is the text differentiating the definitive and the provisional meanings of the sutras by Tsongkhapa. So, because he was involved in the translation, I asked him whether Tsongkhapa, the author, could be considered one of the Nalanda scholars or not. And without any hesitation, he said not only a scholar, but a top Nalanda scholar Tsongkhapa could be. And then Jerem also wrote the stages of the path to enlightenment in accordance with following the Kadampa master's writings on that genre of teaching. But his scholarship, profundity of his scholarship, could be seen through his writing the special insight section of the Lamrim Chemo and Lamrim, the smaller Lamrim. And so these two insight sections of these two, and then the essence of true eloquence, and then the commentaries to Mula Madhyamaka Karika and Madhyamaka Avatara. If you read these 5 texts on middle way philosophy, you'll be able to see how Jerem himself was able to overcome all the doubts about the philosophical inputs. And if you look at Jerem life, of course, you'll see that his understanding of the middle way philosophy was not so advanced. If you read his commentary on Abhisamaya Alamkara, the garland of rosary, and there's a golden rosary, and then his poetical writing, which is recounting the life story of, life account of Sada Prarudita, the Bodhisattva. You'll see this. So I have 2 masters who were from Kinnaur region of Himachal Pradesh. One is Khunu Lama Tenzin Gyaltsen, and the other one is Geshe Rigdzin Tempa. So I received the teaching on this text, the praise for teaching dependent origination from Gen Rinzin Tempa. I don't remember who he received it from. So first we'll go through the text. In the language of India, it is called Madhyamaka Avatara. In the Tibetan language, it is called Umala Jukpa. And then there's a prostration to the youthful Manjushri. So in Tibet, we have over 100 volumes of the translated words of the Buddha and over 200 volumes of the exegetical treatises. So in Chinese, there is maybe about 15. So maybe there are about 15 texts or so which were translated from Chinese. But except for these, the rest of the Tenjur were from the Indian languages, translated from Indian language. So we may have translations from Pali, such as the texts on the monastic code of discipline and others. And then with regard to the exegesis written in India, there is the text written by Maitreya, which from whom came the extensive lineage of conduct. And then the profound lineage of the view came through Master Nagarjuna, and there have been many Indian masters, scholars of Madhyamaka tradition. And then there were Indian masters who were also masters of logic and reasoning. And so the text gives this title in Indian language, Madhyamaka Avatara, which is to show the authenticity of the lineage. And so Madhyamaka Avatara, Madhyamaka means the middle way, Avatara entering. And then the salutation to youthful Manjushri is a salutation by the translator in order to avert any obstacle that the translators may come across during the translation. And then, so when the translators translated the text from India, the prostration in the beginning was made to the omniscient one if the text belonged to the Vinaya. And if it belonged to the Sutra, the salutation was made to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. And then if it belonged to the that of Abhidharma genre of text, then the salutation is made to Manjushri. So this was according to the decree of the Tibetan emperors in the ancient times. So Master Chandrakirti, the great abbot, was invited by the Tibetan Emperor Tsongkhapa, and then under the guidance and direction of the Master Chandrakirti, the Samye monastery was built. And within that monastery, there was a translators department, and then also the monastery of the pure morality, where the monastic ordinations were given. And because of the family lineage, the family connection with the Chinese emperors in those ancient times, since the Tang dynasty, there were Chinese meditators and monks in the department called the meditation or the concentration department. And then there was a fourth department within the Samye complex, which is the Tantric department of the white robes. Those are clad in white robes, and so for those of the tantric practitioners, this tantric department was established. And then the translations were carried out, and over 220 volumes of the Tengyur, the translations of the exegetical treatises, were made. And with regard to the title of the text, and engaging the middle way, so entering the middle way. So the middle way here could be that of the subject matter that is covered sometimes, but here it refers to that of the concept of dependent origination. As Master Nagarjuna says, what is dependently arisen is said to be empty, and that is said to be designated itself, and that is the middle way. So dependence means that things cannot come about by itself or themselves, but they come about in dependence on others. And therefore, they are without any independent existence. So that word, dependence, does away with the extreme of permanence. And arising or origination means that things come about through dependence on others, or exists by way of dependence on others. As Tsongkhapa says, because of the reason that things come through dependence on others, we can do away with the two extremes of permanence and nihilism. So with regard to dependence, there is the dependence in terms of causality. And so through this understanding of dependence in terms of causality and others, we can do away with that of the nihilistic view. And then when you use that understanding of the middle way in path, you have the path which is called the middle way. And then the text which actually cover or touches on this subject matter are also termed middle way. So many Tibetan masters have memorized the Mula Madhyamaka Karika by Nagarjuna, and then gave teaching on them. So there is this, again, Tongpen Rinpoche, who also has established his own tradition of giving teaching after the students have memorized Mula Madhyamaka Karika. So Mula Madhyamaka Karika touches on the profound subject matter of emptiness, and then Ratnavali, Precious Garland by Nagarjuna, teaches those of the extensive path. And Madhyamaka Avatara touches on both the aspects of the teaching or the practice, the profound and the extensive. So in the 400 verses of Aryadeva, there are criticism of the non-Buddhist philosophical views, but not so much, I think, of the critique of the Chittamatra view. So, of course, there are sutras like Sutra Unraveling the Thoughts and others, which are sutras of the Chittamatra philosophical view, which are used by Master Asanga and his younger brother Vasubandhu to forth the Chittamatra philosophical tradition. Whereas in the Madhyamaka text, Madhyamaka Avatara, and others, there are lots of criticisms of the philosophical views of other traditions. And so Madhyamaka Avatara is a commentary to Mula Madhyamaka Karika in terms of its content, the meaning. And then Chandrakirti's Prasanapada, which is called the lucid, the clear words, is a commentary, a word-for-word commentary of Mula Madhyamaka Karika. And then Aryadeva also wrote the 400 verses, which also is a commentary or kind of a supplement to the Mula Madhyamaka Karika. And then Buddha Palita wrote Buddha Palita commentary as a commentary to Mula Madhyamaka Karika of Nagarjuna. And then Bhavaviveka wrote the Lamp of Wisdom in which he picks up some points of Buddha Palita commentary and criticizes them. And then in the clear words, Master Chandrakirti also critiques those of the criticism of that of Bhavaviveka. And so from this, we find a clear distinction between the two strands of Madhyamaka philosophical tradition. So unless Bhavaviveka had critiqued Buddha Palita, Chandrakirti would not have come up with that kind of criticism of Bhavaviveka's views. So it's very important for us to really read these texts together and compare and contrast them, not just study only one text. Because if you read the different texts, then you'll find different interpretations, different explanations, and find the reasons for them. You can see this text actually uses this kind of reasoning to criticize others' positions, and the other text uses other reasons. And therefore, in our tradition, we actually come across these 3 points of critiquing others' positions, establishing one's own position, and then rebuttal of the criticism to one's own position. So when you actually cover the texts through these 3, by using these 3 points, you'll be able to gain a true conviction in the import of the texts. And when someone else criticizes you, you could say, oh, that's not what you are criticizing is right, because I am criticizing this philosophical tradition through reason. And so the Tibetan tradition follows this critical approach to the different treatises written by Indian masters. But somehow in our monastic institutions of learning, the monastics have become more kind of a closed kind of approach, just following their own textbooks and not reading the Indian commentaries and treatises. So I have discussions with the scholars to read the Indian commentaries and treatises as well. So here, entering the middle way means the middle way refers to that of the Mula Madhyamaka Karika by Master Nagarjuna. And entering it means it's commenting on the meaning. So the first verse, Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas are born from the Muni King. Buddhas are born from Bodhisattvas and from the mind of compassion. Non-dual cognition and bodhicitta is born the Bodhisattva. So this is a verse of salutation. So Shravakas listen to teachings from the Buddhas and then pass it on to others, or proclaim those teachings to others. So the Shravakas include masters like those of the great Mahakashapa. And then Pratyeka Buddhas also could be understood in terms of middling realizers, realizing that of the suchness. So they are produced through the teaching of the Buddha, or born from the teaching of the Buddha. The Muni King refers to Buddha. And then the Buddhas come from bodhisattvas as their substantial cause. So the term Buddha in Tibetan is Sang, which means doing away with all defilements, and Ge means having the full knowledge. So here, with regard to our own mind, which has the nature of clarity and cognition, so the cognitive power is there in the mind, but when we are not able to realize everything as it is, what hinders that is the defilement. So this obscuration to knowledge obscures or veils our mind from knowing everything, the object of knowledge. So in order to eliminate this obscuration to knowledge, of course there are different interpretations according to the different philosophical schools, but according to Madhyamaka, the middle way school, the obscuration to knowledge is an imprint left by our destructive emotions. So in order to be able to overcome it and eliminate it from the mind stream, we need to overcome the destructive emotions first. And in order to be also able to teach others according to their predispositions, interests, and so forth, we need to actually know the other's mind. Precisely. And then there are those of the destructive emotions which actually cause us suffering. And so these two defilements, the destructive emotion defilement and the obscuration to knowledge defilement, needs to be overcome from our mind stream. And then with regard to the former, it is actually said that there are 84,000 negative emotions. In order to overcome that, we need to develop the antidote. This cannot happen just by reciting mantras or meditating and visualizing deities alone. But as explained earlier, all the negative emotions arise from the ignorance. The fundamental ignorance is a distorted view of reality. So this ignorance, of course, with regard to ignorance, there's a merely not knowing something, such as the alphabet. So that, for example, if you're ignorant about the alphabet, A, B, C, and so forth, I mean, you need to be introduced to the letters. And once you learn the alphabet, this is A, this is B, this is C, and so forth, then the ignorance will be gone. But here we are talking about a deeper ignorance, which is the ignorance about the reality of how things are. And for that you need to know the reality itself. And therefore, in order to overcome the obscuration to knowledge, which is the latent potency left by the destructive emotions, we need to have the realization of emptiness supported by a huge amount of merit. So it cannot come about instantly. We need to progress along the path as referred by the mantra of the Heart Sutra, Tatyatha Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Bodhiswaha. So as your antidote to this ignorance develops further and further, then these negative or destructive emotions also will be done away with. And so you become finally fully enlightened being, a Buddha, and the Buddhas come from bodhisattvas. So bodhisattvas precede one's Buddhahood. And therefore, the text says Buddhas are born from bodhisattvas. And then, with regard to the bodhisattvas, how does a bodhisattva come about? The text says, from the mind of compassion, non-dual cognition, and bodhicitta is born the bodhisattvas. And the precious garland of Master Nagarjuna says that one who wishes to reach the highest, aspires to the highest enlightenment for oneself and others, the cause is at the root of which is that of the bodhicitta, and its substantial cause could be, we could say, is that of compassion, the great compassion. And this great compassion, a bodhicitta, is has the complemented by the two aspirations. So one understands that the suffering comes from our karma, which in turn comes because of destructive emotions, and their destructive emotions arise because of ignorance. And therefore, through the process of learning and reflection and meditation, when you actually are able to confirm that it's possible for you to save sentient beings from suffering, then you have this compassion. And then the non-dual wisdom is mentioned in the precious garland. So in order to actually understand what enlightenment means, we need to actually have the knowledge of what liberation means. And for compassion, to be able to see that one could actually liberate others from suffering with compassion, without understanding what suffering has come from, you will not be able to really work precisely against that cause of suffering. Although you might have a warm heart to liberate others. So, bodhicitta, which comes from compassion, and also the wisdom or the view of emptiness. These three, and here the bodhicitta particularly refers to the stage where you are still at a trainee level, where there's no genuine experience of bodhicitta yet. So these three are the cause for the bodhisattvas. So in the world today, there are so much suffering and much problem, and many of them are rooted in our self-centered attitude, thinking only about one's own well-being. From the world at large, if you think, and then down to the family level, I mean, all the problems arise because of the self-centered attitude. So it brings about all kinds of problems and difficulties. And so this can be overcome only by cherishing others over oneself. Not just wishing others to be out of suffering, but that you will take the responsibilities to free them from suffering. And for that, you need to know what suffering is and its causes. And when you are confident of the possibility to overcome suffering and its causes, then you will really have that full confidence to work for liberating others from suffering. So the negative emotions regarding the one American scientist whom I know, maybe he's nearly 100. I don't know if he's still alive. When I first met him, he was 84. And then, from his own experience, I was quite convinced, and then I deliberately went to see him 2 years ago. So, of course, he is not a believer, leave alone being a Buddhist. And he's someone who has been treated people with psychiatric problem, mainly having problem due to anger and hatred. So to such patients, who he treated to ameliorate their hatred, he said that when we are angry at somebody or something, that thing or the person looks absolutely negative, but 90% of that negativeness is our own mental projection. So this is what he said. He's not a Buddhist, a scientist. He is. So as a Western scientist, I asked him about attachment, and he said there's no problem. Attachment is not a problem. But from the point of view of Buddhism, because of attachment, anger arises. The more you are attached to something or somebody, the greater chance of anger when something bad happens to that person or thing. So this is what he said. But what he said and what is said in the Buddha Master Nagarjuna's Madhyamaka Avatar, Mula Madhyamaka Karika, where he says that karma arises through destructive emotions, and destructive emotions arise through exaggerated outlook. So, of course, things good and bad, or beautiful and or attractive and unattractiveness is there, but because of this exaggerated way of looking, we actually impose something more than what is there, good or bad. And because of that exaggerated outlook, we have attachments and anger. With reference to things beautiful or unattractive. And then this arises through fabrication, which refers to the clinging to some true independent existence in things. And this is ended by emptiness, or with emptiness. So, because of this exaggerated, clinging to true existence, we have the exaggerated outlook on seeing excessively beautiful or ugliness in things, and then that gives rise to the negative emotions. And when we are angry at somebody, if what we see in the person at that moment were to be true, we should be angry at the person the same way after 10 years or 20 years and so forth. We may think how bad that person. And when the anger subsides, you may say, oh, he's not so bad. But because of this exaggeration, which actually conceives and clings on to what we perceive in the person, could change, of course. Because today you may be angry at the person, you dislike him or her, but after a while you may become friends with the person. And then again, something goes wrong, and you become angry and you fight with the person. So this happens. And so this is what the scientists said, that anger has this exaggerated outlook. And then this arises from the fabrication, which is clinging to a true independent existence in things. That must be stopped. So whatever appears to us, they appear as if they have some objective independent existence in and of themselves. But when you are actually able to feel convinced that their things do not have such an independent absolute existence, this can destroy the objectification. So, of course, you may be able to reduce or minimize the attachment and anger towards objects, outside objects, but still, this kind of idea that the things do not have an external existence may not counter the clinging to true existence of your own mind. And therefore, the Madhyamakas say nothing has any true existence. And so here we come across the subtlety between the Madhyamaka and the other philosophical schools, identification of what is to be negated in establishing selflessness or emptiness. And so the Madhyamaka philosophy also within it, there is the distinction between those who say that there's objective existence in things and that there's no objective existence in things whatever, and whether the object of negation in establishing emptiness appears to our sensory perception or not. So if you are able to destroy all objectification in things and self, then there is no way, no room for exaggerated outlook, which means there's no room for the negative emotions to arise. And so what the scientist was saying is true. So if you actually have some experience, you'll be able to confirm this to be true. So as an 82-year-old, over 82-year-old man who has, I have paid attention to the view of emptiness. It's been over 60 years. So about then, around 50 years ago, I had this confirmation that an experience that through which I am convinced that there is no self of a person. About 50 years ago, I had that experience. So when you think about yourself, of course, we have this conception that the person has some independent existence. But when I came across the statement in the commentary to Madhyamaka Avatara by Tsongkhapa, talking about that the person has no independent or existence, just as it appears. I had some experience like a lightning bolt. And some other struck by lightning bolt, and this experience other meditators also had. And so, around 30 years ago, after having still reflected on this selflessness, So when I look at things and they appear to have some kind of objective existence, I could confirm that they do not have any objective existence. So without realizing selflessness is a phenomena, of course, you may have a realization of the rough, the cursor level of selflessness of persons, which is that of the selflessness of persons in terms of the lack of substantially existent self. So with regard to these two types of selflessness of persons and selflessness of phenomena, there is no difference in them in terms of subtlety. Both are subtle selflessness, but the difference is, the division is made on the basis of persons, of beings, and other phenomena. So when you are able to confirm that there is no such thing as an independent, truly existing self, then the grasping at the self of a person and phenomena can be overcome. That kind of conviction arises. And therefore, you also are able to see the possibility of attaining liberation. So it's very important for us to develop the experience of these teachings on selflessness, not just following a dry word, but having learned what is taught in the text, actually applying it in one's practice of meditation. As it is mentioned in the prayer to Tsongkhapa, the 100 deities of Tushita heaven, the Jerem Butches' life account is kind of summarized that he is not led astray by the 8 worldly concerns. And then the Jerem Butche himself has said that in the beginning he sought much learning, and in the middle all the teachings dawned as personal instruction, spiritual instruction, and then in the end he put them into practice day and night. And then he says that one should not be satisfied with the partial knowledge of the text, but should learn all the different texts without any feeling satisfied with little knowledge. And therefore, that is what he had done. So it's important for us to go through the texts, read them, and analyze them thoroughly. So Jerem Butche says, study all these texts thoroughly, in great detail. You should not say that I'm a Gelugpa and leave aside those of the Nyingma texts like Longchen Ramchapa's writings. And then similarly, it is the case with the Nyingma scholars, students of Nyingma tradition, that they should study the other writings from the other traditions like Gelug, Satya, Kagyu, and so forth. So all the different followers of the different Tibetan Buddhist traditions must study the writings from the other traditions. So I feel tired as I age more. I feel more tired. So for today, I'll stop here. In the afternoon, there is a revision, and Geshe Temple Sangla will do the revision. I've been asked to announce. I'm saying it. Allez. So His Holiness was just talking about the attendant, ritual attendant Kushotashila, who has an injury on his head, and His Holiness was saying that that was not because of my hitting him, but he actually banged his head somewhere. So in the afternoon we'll have review session. If those who have spare time for the review, you should come. May the precious sublime bodhicitta arise where it is not a reason. It may never decline, but increase ever further.